Welcome back to Midnight Affair Tales. Thank you for joining us. Ethan adjusted his tie in the mirror, glancing at his wife, Sarah, as she admired her reflection. They were on their way to a friend's dinner party, a regular event among their social circle in Denver. Ethan loved these gatherings for the chance to relax and enjoy good company, though he often felt like a supporting character to Sarah's vibrant personality. Tonight, she looked stunning in her sleek black dress, her laughter already echoing in his ears as they left for the evening. As the night wore on, the wine flowed freely. Sarah, the life of the party as always, had a little too much. Her cheeks flushed as she spoke animatedly with their friends, but her tone turned sharper when she started talking about Ethan. "He's a good guy," she slurred. "But, you know," her voice dropped but not low enough, "I've kind of settled. He's just not exciting or attractive anymore." Ethan froze. The room seemed to fall silent, though the chatter continued around him. Those words, delivered so carelessly, cut deeper than he thought possible. He'd always suspected Sarah might view him as boring, but hearing it spoken aloud, in front of others no less, felt like a knife to his chest. Without a word, he excused himself from the table and walked out into the cold Denver night, his heart pounding and his mind racing. Ethan didn't go home that night. Instead, he drove aimlessly through the quiet streets of Denver, the city lights blurring in his vision as Sarah's words echoed in his mind. Not attractive, settled? He gripped the steering wheel tightly, the weight of betrayal pressing down on his chest like a heavy stone. How had it come to this? How had the woman he devoted his life to reduced their years of marriage to such callous words? As dawn began to break, Ethan pulled into an empty parking lot. The chill of the early morning seeped through his car windows as he leaned back in his seat, staring blankly at the pale pink sky. He couldn't go back, not tonight, not to the house filled with memories that now felt hollow. He reached for his phone, hesitating for a moment before pulling up his bank app. Methodically, he transferred funds to a private account he had set up years ago, more as a safety net than with any real intention of using it. But now it felt like an escape route. The thought steadied him. If Sarah truly saw him as nothing more than a convenience, then maybe it was time to remove himself from her life entirely. Ethan wasn't impulsive by nature. Every decision he'd ever made had been careful, calculated. This would be no different. Over the next several hours, he laid out a plan with meticulous precision. His skills as an IT consultant gave him the tools to erase his tracks. By the time Sarah woke up that morning, he would be nothing more than a ghost in her life. He booked a storage unit and began transferring his essentials. Items that held meaning to him but wouldn't spark suspicion if they were gone. His clothes, a few sentimental keepsakes, and the laptop that carried his entire professional life. By the time he was done, the closet and house would look largely untouched, just another quiet morning in their home. As he packed, Ethan penned a note on the back of a receipt he found in his glove box. His hand trembled slightly as he scrawled the words, "You won't have to settle anymore." When everything was ready, he returned briefly to the house. The silence was deafening as he placed the note on the kitchen counter, next to the coffee maker where Sarah would be sure to see it. Without looking back, Ethan stepped out into the crisp morning air, breathing deeply as he closed the door behind him. For the first time in years, he felt a sliver of freedom, but it came wrapped in a veil of heartbreak. As the sun rose higher over Denver, Sarah stirred awake, unaware of the emptiness that now filled her home. Sarah groaned as she sat up in bed, the pounding in her head a stark reminder of the previous night's indulgence. The dinner party had been lively, perhaps too lively, and flashes of the evening came rushing back. Laughter, wine, and what else? A vague sense of unease gripped her, though she couldn't place its source. She swung her legs over the side of the bed, wincing as the cool floor met her bare feet. Reaching for her phone, she noticed a string of notifications from friends, most of them vague and unusually formal. Frowning, Sarah tried to piece together the gaps in her memory. She remembered Ethan sitting quietly at the table, remembered the way the room seemed to shift after something she said. Her stomach churned as snippets of her own voice came flooding back. "Oh no," she whispered, pressing her palms to her temples. "What did I say?" Shaking off the uneasy feeling, Sarah padded into the kitchen, expecting to find Ethan brewing his usual pot of coffee. But the house was eerily silent, the kind of silence that carried a weight she couldn't ignore. Her eyes fell on the counter, where a single scrap of paper caught her attention. She stepped closer, her heart beginning to race as she picked it up. You won't have to settle anymore. The words hit her like a slap. She read them once, then again, her mind refusing to process what they meant. A cold pit of dread settled in her stomach as she glanced around. The usual signs of Ethan's presence, his wallet on the counter, his keys by the door, were missing. No, 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 she murmured, panic rising in her chest. She called his phone, the ringing tone echoing loudly in her ear before going to voicemail. Ethan, it's me. Where are you? Please call me back. Her voice cracked as she hung up, her hands trembling. Over the next hour, Sarah searched every corner of the house, the truth becoming clearer with each passing moment. He was gone. Not just for the night, but truly gone. She checked the closet where his clothes were noticeably thinned out, and the garage where his car no longer sat. Tears welled up in her eyes as guilt wrapped itself around her like a vice. Memories of their life together rushed in. His quiet support, the way he always made her coffee just the way she liked, the nights he picked her up from parties without a word of complaint. And then, like a cruel echo, her drunken confession replayed in her mind. He's just not exciting or attractive anymore. How could I have said that? She whispered, sinking to the floor. Her phone buzzed with another message, this one from a mutual friend. Sarah, are you okay? Ethan left the party so abruptly. Hope everything's all right. But everything wasn't all right. For the first time, Sarah faced the possibility that the man she had taken for granted might not come back. And it was entirely her fault. While Sarah wrestled with the weight of her guilt, Ethan's journey was already beginning. One that would lead him far from the life they had built together. Ethan's new life began in a small town in Arizona, far from the familiar streets of Denver. He rented a modest apartment under a new name and started fresh. It wasn't just a physical relocation, it was a complete transformation. He joined a gym, something he'd always meant to do but never prioritized. He updated his wardrobe, ditching the dull, practical clothes Sarah used to tease him about. And for the first time in years he began pursuing his own interests, photography, hiking, and even salsa dancing. Every day he felt stronger, more confident. The pain of Sarah's words still lingered, but he channeled it into motivation. He wasn't rebuilding his life for her or even to spite her. He was doing it for himself. The man he saw in the mirror now, fit, stylish, and self-assured, was unrecognizable from the meek husband Sarah had taken for granted. Back in Denver, Sarah's life was unraveling. The house felt emptier than she ever imagined it could. Every room was a reminder of Ethan. His favorite chair, his tools in the garage, the smell of his cologne lingering in the closet. She couldn't escape the gnawing guilt that consumed her. Her friends tried to console her, but their words only deepened her shame. You were too hard on him, one of them said. Ethan adored you. You'll never find someone like him again. The worst part was knowing they were right. For the first time in years, Sarah allowed herself to reflect on all the little things Ethan had done for her. The morning coffees, the late-night drives to pick her up from parties, the quiet way he supported her dreams without asking for anything in return. She had taken it all for granted, and now it was too late. Ethan sat in his dimly lit apartment, the glow of his laptop screen reflecting off his glasses. He had started fresh in Arizona, building a life far removed from the one he had left behind in Denver. Yet, no matter how hard he tried, there were moments when the pull of the past became too strong to ignore. Tonight was one of those nights. The cursor blinked in the search bar as Ethan hesitated. It had been months since he last thought about Sarah, or at least that's what he told himself. But curiosity gnawed at him, an itch he couldn't quite scratch. What was she doing? Was she happy without him? Did she miss him? Against his better judgment, he typed her name into a private browser. Her social media profile loaded, the familiar face staring back at him. The photos were few and far between now. No more flashy party pictures or vibrant smiles. Instead, her posts seemed subdued, almost hollow. In one, she stood with a group of friends, her smile forced and her eyes tired. In another, she held a glass of wine at what appeared to be a quiet gathering, the caption reading, "Here's to moving forward." Ethan's chest tightened as he scrolled. He wanted to feel satisfaction, to believe that she deserved to struggle after the hurt she had caused him. But instead, a wave of pity washed over him. This wasn't the lively, confident Sarah he had once known. She looked lost. He slammed the laptop shut, the noise echoing in the silence of his apartment. "What are you doing?" he muttered to himself. He had left for a reason, started over to escape the weight of their broken marriage. Yet here he was, letting her ghost linger in his life. Determined to break free from the cycle, Ethan made a decision. He deleted the fake account he had used to check on her, removing the last thread that connected him to her world. It was time to stop looking back and focus on the future he was building for himself. As he stood by the window, staring out at the quiet Arizona night, Ethan took a deep breath. The past was a heavy weight, but it didn't have to define him anymore. He wasn't the man Sarah had left behind. He was someone stronger now, someone who didn't need her validation. And tonight he vowed to finally let her go. Ethan leaned against the windowsill, staring into the Arizona night. The realization that he had truly let go of Sarah felt both liberating and terrifying. He had taken a bold step by cutting the last thread that connected him to her, but moving forward wasn't just about leaving things behind. It was about finding something new, something worth holding on to. And perhaps, in the unlikeliest of places, that something was about to find him. Ethan's days had fallen into a steady rhythm, a comforting blend of work, self-care, and rediscovery. His mornings were spent at the gym, afternoons immersed in freelance projects, and evenings exploring the vibrant streets of Sedona. Arizona had given him a fresh start, but the emptiness Sarah's betrayal had left behind wasn't so easily filled. It was during one of his morning gym sessions that a spark of change entered his life. Ethan was mid-set, lifting weights, when a voice cut through the hum of background music. "You're new here, aren't you?" Startled, Ethan looked up to see a woman with fiery red hair and sharp green eyes smiling at him. She was effortlessly curling weights, her form perfect and her tone light-hearted. "Figured I'd say hi before you outlift everyone," she added with a smirk. Ethan chuckled, setting the barbell back onto its rack. "Not quite there yet," he replied, his voice carrying a hint of self-consciousness. "I'm Kara," she said, offering a hand. "I'm here almost every morning. Haven't seen you before." Ethan shook her hand, noticing the strength in her grip. "Ethan, I moved here a few months ago. Trying to get back in shape." Kara laughed. "Well, this is the place to do it. If you need a spotter, I'm your girl." Over the next several weeks, their conversations became a regular part of Ethan's gym routine. Kara was magnetic, her quick wit and candid nature drawing him in. She wasn't afraid to share pieces of her own story, a messy divorce, betrayal, and her journey to rebuild herself. "Sometimes starting over isn't a choice," she said one evening over coffee after a particularly challenging workout. "It's survival." Ethan nodded, her words resonating deeply. For the first time in a long time, he felt understood, though he kept the details of his past vague. Kara didn't push, sensing that he wasn't ready to share everything just yet. Her friendship wasn't romantic, but it gave Ethan a sense of connection he hadn't realized he needed. She became a sounding board for his thoughts, someone who didn't judge or pity him. "You're stronger than you think," Kara told him one morning, her voice firm yet kind. Those words stayed with Ethan long after she said them. As he watched the Arizona sunrise the next day, he realized that Kara wasn't just helping him rebuild his body, she was helping him rebuild his confidence and his belief in himself. For the first time in years, Ethan felt the faint stirrings of hope for something more. Back in Denver, Sarah's life was unraveling. Her attempts to distract herself with work, friends, and shallow dates only deepened the emptiness. One night, while cleaning out the closet, she found Ethan's old sweatshirt. The scent of his cologne lingered faintly, and the tears came before she could stop them. She clutched the sweatshirt to her chest, sobbing uncontrollably. "Why did I do this?" she whispered to herself. The question hung in the air, unanswered. Her best friend Lila tried to intervene. "Sarah, you have to move on," Lila said during one of their coffee dates. "You can't keep punishing yourself." "I'm not punishing myself," Sarah argued. "I'm trying to figure out how to fix it." Lila sighed. "And what if he doesn't want to be found?" That possibility hit Sarah like a freight train. What if Ethan truly never came back? The thought terrified her. She'd always assumed he'd eventually return, but as weeks turned into months, hope began to slip away. For the first time, Sarah confronted the harsh reality that she might never get the chance to apologize, and it was entirely her fault. Ethan's days grew busier as his freelance business flourished. His reputation for precision and reliability earned him steady clients, and his confidence soared with every success. Yet there were moments when the past crept in. A mutual friend from Denver messaged him one afternoon. "Hey Ethan, it's been a while. How's life?" Ethan debated responding, but curiosity got the better of him. Good, he replied simply. The next message came almost immediately. Sarah's not doing great. Not that you owe her anything, but she's a mess. The words tugged at something deep within him. For all her flaws, Sarah had been a significant part of his life. He closed the app without replying, but the thought lingered. Later that night, as he stared at the ceiling, Ethan wondered if leaving without a trace had been the right choice. He'd found freedom and clarity, but had he also abandoned any chance of closure? The next day he found himself typing Sarah's name into a private browser. Her social media was sparse, but her recent photo, eyes tired and smile forced, made his chest tighten. She looked like someone struggling to hold it together. Shaking his head, he closed the laptop. She's not my problem anymore, he muttered, though the words rang hollow. Ethan's resolve was tested unexpectedly during a business trip to Phoenix. As he walked into a bustling coffee shop, his eyes scanned the crowd. Then he froze. Sitting in a corner, nursing a latte, was Sarah. Her hair was slightly disheveled, and her eyes carried the weight of sleepless nights. She didn't see him at first, but when her gaze finally lifted, their eyes locked. Her expression shifted from disbelief to a mix of hope and sorrow. "Ethan," she whispered, standing slowly. "Is it really you?" Ethan's heart raced, but his face remained calm. "Sarah." She moved closer, tears brimming in her eyes. I can't believe it. I've been looking for you." "Why?" Ethan's voice was steady but firm. "You made it clear what you thought of me." Sarah flinched, the weight of her guilt evident. "I was drunk. I was stupid. I didn't mean it. Please, can we talk?" Ethan hesitated, the years of pain and transformation colliding in his mind. Finally he nodded. "One conversation. That's all." As they sat down, the air between them crackled with unspoken emotions. Neither knew where the conversation would lead, but they both understood that this moment would change everything. The coffee shop buzzed around them, but for Ethan and Sarah, time seemed to stand still. She sat across from him, her hands trembling slightly as she stirred her coffee. Ethan leaned back in his chair, his face unreadable. "So," he began, breaking the silence, "you wanted to talk." Sarah's voice faltered at first. "Ethan, I don't even know where to start. I've been so lost without you." She paused, her eyes searching his face for any sign of forgiveness. "I was drunk that night. What I said, I didn't mean it. I don't even know why I said it." Ethan's jaw tightened. "You don't know why?" His tone was calm, but there was an edge to it. "You don't accidentally tell someone they're not attractive. That's not a slip of the tongue." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "I was wrong. I've realized that now. Losing you made me see how much I took you for granted. Please, Ethan, I'm so sorry." Ethan stared at her, his mind racing. The pain she caused still burned, but seeing her like this, vulnerable and raw, was almost unsettling. "I've changed, Sarah. I'm not the man you left behind. I've built a new life for myself." Her voice cracked. "Can't we try again? Start over?" Ethan's lips pressed into a thin line. "I'll think about it. But don't expect an answer today." He stood, leaving her sitting there, a mixture of hope and despair on her face. As he walked out, he realized that even considering giving her another chance felt like a betrayal of the man he'd become. Ethan returned to his hotel, his thoughts churning. The sight of Sarah had stirred emotions he thought he'd buried long ago. He opened his laptop, staring at the empty screen. Work had always been his escape, but now even that felt impossible. The next day Kara called. "You sound distracted," she said after a brief hello. "It's nothing," Ethan replied, though his tone gave him away. Kara wasn't buying it. "Nothing doesn't make your voice sound like that." "Spill it?" Ethan hesitated before finally relenting. "I ran into my ex-wife. The one I walked away from." Kara's silence stretched for a moment. "And how did that go?" "Complicated," Ethan admitted. "She wants to talk, maybe even fix things." "Do you want that?" Kara's question was pointed, her tone calm but probing. "I don't know," Ethan said honestly. "Part of me feels like I'd be going backward. But another part wonders if I owe her a second chance." Kara's response was firm. "You don't owe her anything. Not after what she said. But you owe yourself the clarity to know what you truly want." Ethan sighed. Clarity, that was the one thing he lacked. He decided to take a walk, hoping the fresh air would clear his mind. As he strolled through Phoenix's streets, he realized that while his new life had given him freedom, it hadn't freed him from the memories of Sarah. Sarah sat in the coffee shop long after Ethan had left, her heart aching with regret. She had hoped he'd forgive her instantly, but the cold reality of his reaction left her shaken. She needed a plan, something to show him she was serious about making amends. Back home, she pulled out an old box of mementos from their life together. There were photos from their vacations, notes he'd written her, and even a worn-out playlist they'd created in the early days of their marriage. Tears streamed down her face as she realized how much she had taken for granted. She called Lila. "I saw Ethan," Sarah said, her voice trembling. "What? Where? How did it go?" Lila's voice was laced with surprise. "Not great," Sarah admitted. "But I need to fix this. I was thinking of putting together something meaningful to remind him of what we had." Lila sighed. "Sarah, this isn't a movie. You can't just make a scrapbook and expect him to come running back." "It's not just that," Sarah said. "I need to show him I've changed. That I understand what I did and how badly I hurt him." "Then you need to be honest," Lila said. "And you need to accept that he might not want to come back." Sarah swallowed hard. "I'm not ready to give up on him." With renewed determination, she began crafting a heartfelt letter. It wasn't just an apology, it was an acknowledgement of her mistakes and a promise to be better. As she wrote, she prayed it wouldn't be too late. Ethan's morning began like any other, coffee brewing, emails piling up, and the Arizona sun streaming through his apartment window. But his routine was interrupted by a knock at the door. He hesitated, wondering who could possibly be visiting him. When he opened it, a courier handed him a small package with no return address. Puzzled, Ethan signed for it and brought it inside. Inside the package was a letter. As soon as he saw Sarah's handwriting on the envelope, his chest tightened. He debated throwing it away, but curiosity got the better of him. He sat down, took a deep breath, and began to read. "Ethan, I know I'm the last person you want to hear from, and I don't blame you for that. But I need you to know how deeply sorry I am. What I said that night was cruel and untrue. You didn't deserve it, and I'll regret it for the rest of my life. You were my rock, my safe place, and I took that for granted. Losing you has been the hardest thing I've ever experienced, and it's made me realize how much I need to change. I'm working on myself, truly, but I don't expect you to take me back. I only ask for the chance to show you that I can be better. Please think about meeting me one more time. I understand if you say no, but I hope you'll give me the chance to make things right. Sarah." Ethan folded the letter and set it on the table, his mind spinning. The words were sincere, but they also reopened old wounds. He stared at the letter for what felt like hours, weighing his next move. Kara's voice echoed in Ethan's mind as he walked through the park later that day. "You owe yourself clarity?" That was why, despite his reservations, he decided to call Sarah. He needed answers, not just for her but for himself. When Sarah picked up, there was a moment of silence before she spoke. "Ethan? I got your letter," he said, his voice steady. "And?" she asked hesitantly. "We can meet," Ethan replied. "But understand this, I'm not promising anything. I just want to talk." The relief in Sarah's voice was palpable. "Thank you. That's all I'm asking for." They agreed to meet at a quiet park the following weekend. When the day arrived, Ethan found her sitting on a bench, clutching the edges of her coat. She looked up as he approached, a mixture of hope and nervousness on her face. "Thank you for coming," she said softly. "Let's get one thing straight," Ethan began, his tone firm but not unkind. "I'm here for closure, Sarah. Not to pick up where we left off." Her expression faltered, but she nodded. "I understand." For the next hour they talked, really talked. Sarah opened up about her guilt, her efforts to change, and the emptiness she'd felt since he left. Ethan listened, his emotions swirling as he heard the sincerity in her voice. By the end of their conversation, he didn't feel anger anymore, but he also didn't feel ready to forgive. "I appreciate your honesty," he said as he stood to leave. "But I need time to process all this." Sarah nodded, tears brimming in her eyes. "Take all the time you need." That night Ethan couldn't sleep. His conversation with Sarah replayed in his mind, each word stirring memories and emotions he'd buried deep. He thought about the life they'd shared, the love that had once been so strong, and the betrayal that had shattered it. In the morning he went for a run, pushing himself harder than usual. The physical exertion helped clear his mind. By the time he returned home, sweat dripping and muscles aching, he felt a strange sense of peace. He wasn't ready to let Sarah back into his life, but he also wasn't willing to let her presence derail the progress he'd made. Kara called later that afternoon. "How did it go?" she asked. "Complicated," Ethan admitted. "But I feel lighter. Like maybe I can move forward." "Good," Kara said. "You deserve that." Ethan smiled, her words bolstering his resolve. He wasn't the man Sarah had left behind, and he wasn't going to let her define his future. Whatever happened next, he knew he had the strength to face it on his own terms. Days turned into weeks, and Ethan found himself settling back into his routine. He kept Sarah's letter tucked away, unsure of what to do next. The conversation with her had stirred feelings he couldn't quite categorize, remnants of love, resentment, and something akin to hope. But he was determined not to rush any decisions. One afternoon, while working on a project for a new client, Ethan received an unexpected call. The number wasn't saved in his phone, but something told him to answer. "Hello?" Ethan said cautiously. "Ethan, it's Lila." Sarah's best friend's voice came through the line. Ethan leaned back in his chair, surprised. "Lila? Why are you calling me?" "Look, I know it's not my place," Lila began, "but Sarah is not doing great. She didn't tell me to call you, but I thought you should know. She's been going to therapy, trying to work through everything, but she's struggling." Ethan sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. "Lila, I don't know if I can help her." "I'm not asking you to fix her," Lila said firmly. "I just thought you'd want to know. Do with that information what you will." When the call ended, Ethan sat in silence. He didn't owe Sarah anything, he reminded himself. But a part of him wondered if he was running away from closure, not for her but for himself. Ethan spent the next few days in a haze of indecision. He couldn't shake Lila's words from his mind. Against his better judgment, he decided to drive back to Denver for a weekend. It wasn't to rekindle anything, he told himself, but to see for himself how Sarah was doing. The city felt both familiar and foreign as he drove through its streets. Memories of his life with Sarah flashed in his mind, laughing over takeout, decorating their first Christmas tree, the countless mornings he'd woken up to her smile. But those memories were tinged with the pain of betrayal. He pulled up to their old house. Sarah was in the garden, tending to the flowers she'd always loved. She looked thinner, her movements slower. Ethan watched her from the car for a moment before stepping out. She looked up as he approached, her face a mixture of shock and something he couldn't quite place. "Ethan," she said, standing up and wiping her hands on her jeans. "What are you doing here?" "I don't know," he admitted. "I just needed to see for myself." They stood in silence for a moment before Sarah motioned toward the porch. "Do you want to come inside?" Ethan hesitated but nodded. The house felt the same but different. His presence had been erased, replaced with small changes that felt jarring. They sat in the living room, the weight of unspoken words heavy between them. Sarah poured them both coffee, her hands trembling slightly as she set the mugs on the table. "I wasn't expecting to see you," she said softly. "I wasn't expecting to come," Ethan replied. "But Lila called me. She told me you were having a hard time." Sarah looked down at her hands, her face flushing with embarrassment. "I didn't want you to know. I'm trying to handle it on my own." Ethan studied her, trying to reconcile this vulnerable woman with the confident, careless version of her he'd left behind. "Why didn't you tell me sooner? Before it got to this point?" Sarah's voice cracked. "Because I was scared. Scared that you'd see me for what I really am. Selfish, thoughtless, someone who doesn't deserve you." Ethan leaned back, her words hitting him harder than he expected. "You can't change the past, Sarah. But I need to know, why did you say those things that night? Were they true?" Tears spilled down her cheeks as she shook her head. "No, Ethan. They weren't true. I was drunk and angry at myself, not you. You were everything I wanted but thought I didn't deserve. And instead of facing that, I pushed you away." For the first time, Ethan saw a glimmer of the truth behind her actions. It didn't erase the hurt, but it offered something he hadn't expected: understanding. As they talked late into the night, Ethan realized that while forgiveness wasn't immediate, healing might just be possible, for both of them. Ethan woke up the next morning with a sense of clarity he hadn't felt in years. His conversation with Sarah had been emotionally exhausting but strangely cathartic. For the first time, he saw her as more than the woman who had hurt him. He saw her as a flawed human being, grappling with her own demons. He couldn't erase the past, but perhaps understanding it was the first step toward truly moving on. Sarah too felt a glimmer of hope. As she stood in the kitchen making coffee, she couldn't help but glance at Ethan, who sat quietly at the table, staring out the window. "Thank you for staying," she said softly. Ethan turned to her, his expression unreadable. "I didn't stay for you," he said evenly. "I stayed because I needed answers." Sarah nodded, accepting his honesty. "I don't expect you to forgive me, Ethan. I want you to know that I'm working on being better. Not for you but for myself." "Good," Ethan replied, standing up. "Because that's the only way this conversation means anything." As he left the house, he felt a strange mix of emotions: relief, sadness, and the faintest spark of something new. Whatever lay ahead, he knew one thing for certain. He was no longer defined by her betrayal. Back in Arizona, Ethan threw himself into his work with renewed focus. His clients noticed the change, complimenting his drive and creativity. Yet, in the quiet moments, Sarah's words lingered in his mind. He couldn't deny that their conversation had shifted something within him. The anger he'd carried for so long was beginning to dissolve, replaced by a tentative sense of closure. Kara noticed the change too. "You seem lighter," she said one afternoon as they grabbed coffee. "Did something happen?" Ethan hesitated before replying. "I saw Sarah. We talked." Kara raised an eyebrow. And I think I finally understand," he said. "Not just her but myself. Why I stayed as long as I did, why I left the way I did. It's like I can breathe again." Kara smiled. "Closure will do that. But don't forget, moving on isn't just about understanding the past. It's about building a future." Her words stuck with him. That evening, Ethan opened his journal and began outlining the goals he had for the next year. For the first time in a long time, his future felt full of possibility. Meanwhile, Sarah was making changes of her own. Therapy had become a cornerstone of her life, helping her unpack not only her relationship with Ethan but the patterns that had led her to sabotage it. She'd begun volunteering at a local shelter, finding purpose in helping others. One afternoon, Lila visited her unannounced. "You seem different," Lila said as she settled onto the couch. "I am different," Sarah replied. "I'm learning to let go of the guilt and focus on what I can control." "And Ethan?" Lila asked cautiously. Sarah sighed. "I hope he finds happiness, whether it's with me or not. I've hurt him enough. Now it's about making sure I don't hurt anyone else, including myself." Lila smiled. "Proud of you, Sarah. For real this time." Sarah smiled back, feeling a rare sense of peace. She didn't know if she and Ethan would ever find their way back to each other, but for the first time she was okay with that. What mattered now was who she was becoming, not who she had been. Months later, fate intervened. Ethan was attending a conference in Denver, a last-minute opportunity he almost declined. As he walked through the hotel lobby, his eyes caught a familiar figure. Sarah was standing near the reception desk, talking to a staff member. She looked different, more confident, more grounded. She turned and their eyes met. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Sarah smiled, a genuine, warm smile that Ethan hadn't seen in years. "Ethan," she said, walking toward him. "What are the odds?" "Small world," he replied, his tone neutral but not cold. They talked briefly, exchanging updates on their lives. There was no tension, no awkwardness, just two people who had once shared a life reconnecting on new terms. As they parted ways, Ethan felt an unexpected sense of closure. For the first time, he realized he could see Sarah without feeling the weight of the past. He had truly moved on, and it seemed so had she. Ethan returned to his hotel room that evening, still replaying the brief exchange with Sarah in his mind. It was surreal, almost like meeting a stranger who had once been pivotal in his life. For the first time, their interaction felt free of tension, and he wondered if that was the result of true growth on both their parts. The next day, as he prepared for his presentation at the conference, his phone buzzed. It was a message from Sarah. "Thank you for talking to me yesterday. It meant more than you know." Ethan stared at the screen, his thumb hovering over the keyboard. Finally, he typed a reply. "It was good to see you, Sarah. Take care." He set the phone down and took a deep breath. There was nothing more to say, and that felt okay. The chapter of his life that had revolved around Sarah was finally coming to a close, not with bitterness but with quiet understanding. Back in Arizona, Ethan decided to focus on deepening the connections he'd built in his new life. Kara had become a steady presence, her friendship a source of strength and clarity. Over time, their bond began to shift into something more. One evening, after a long hike through Sedona's red rocks, Kara turned to Ethan. I've been thinking. For someone who started over, you've done an incredible job of finding yourself. Ethan smiled. I think I've had some good influences. She grinned. I'll take partial credit, but you did the hard work. They sat on a rock overlooking the sunset, the silence between them comfortable and unspoken feelings bubbling just beneath the surface. For the first time in years, Ethan felt ready to let someone new into his life, not to replace the past but to complement the future he was building. Sarah, too, was reaching new milestones. Her volunteer work had expanded, and she'd been asked to lead a community outreach program at the shelter. It was the first time in years she felt she had a purpose beyond her personal struggles. One afternoon, as she was sorting donations, she received a call from Lila. Guess what? Lila said excitedly. There's an opening for a nonprofit director position at the foundation I work for. I think you'd be perfect for it. Sarah hesitated. Me? Are you sure? Sarah, you've been rebuilding yourself piece by piece. This is the next step. You're ready, Lila assured her. After a week of contemplation, Sarah applied for the position. When she received the job offer a month later, she cried tears of pride and relief. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she was truly moving forward, not for anyone else but for herself. One evening, as Ethan was finishing up dinner, his phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. He hesitated but answered. Hello? Hi, Ethan. It's Sarah. Ethan's stomach tightened, though he kept his voice calm. Sarah. What's going on? I wanted to let you know. I got a new job. I'm going to be running a nonprofit program, she said, her tone filled with excitement. I know it's probably strange for me to tell you this, but I wanted to thank you. Meeting you again at the hotel, it reminded me that I can move forward. Ethan paused, processing her words. That's great, Sarah. Congratulations. There was a brief silence before she added, I also wanted to say I hope you're happy, Ethan. Truly. You deserve it. I hope the same for you, Ethan replied. Good luck with everything. As the call ended, Ethan felt an overwhelming sense of peace. This wasn't the ending he had once envisioned, but it was the one they both needed. Life had moved on, and so had they, stronger and better for the journey they had endured. Ethan sat on his apartment balcony, the Arizona night quiet except for the faint hum of crickets. Kara's laughter from their hike replayed in his mind, her playful words lingering longer than he expected. Something was changing between them, something undeniable. The next weekend, Ethan invited Kara for dinner. As they cooked together, chopping vegetables and laughing over burnt garlic bread, the ease between them grew. Kara set down her knife and turned to him. Ethan, can I ask you something? He nodded. Sure. What are you looking for, now? After everything? Ethan hesitated, unsure how to articulate what he felt. I think I'm looking for someone who adds to my life, not someone who fills a gap. I spent so much time rebuilding myself. I'm ready to share it with someone who values that. Kara smiled. I think that's a pretty amazing answer. Later that evening, as they sat on his couch with glasses of wine, the conversation shifted to lighter topics, but the connection between them deepened. When Kara leaned in, Ethan didn't pull away. Their kiss was gentle, unhurried, and filled with the promise of something new. For the first time in years, Ethan felt the stirrings of love, real, honest love. Sarah's life had become a whirlwind of meetings, initiatives, and new responsibilities at the nonprofit. One afternoon, as she finalized a grant proposal, her phone buzzed with a text from Lila. Proud of you. Drinks later? Sarah smiled, feeling the warmth of support she hadn't fully appreciated before. At the bar that evening, Lila raised her glass. To new beginnings, she toasted. To growth, Sarah added, clinking their glasses. As they talked, Sarah opened up. I've been thinking about Ethan. Not in a longing way, but in gratitude. Meeting him again gave me the closure I needed. It reminded me that I don't need someone else to define me. Lila nodded approvingly. That's the Sarah I've been waiting to see. Sarah's heart felt lighter. She wasn't chasing redemption anymore, she was living it. The mistakes she had made didn't define her, the steps she took now did. As she walked home, the cool Denver air brushing against her face, she realized she had finally forgiven herself. Months passed and Ethan's life with Kara blossomed into something beautiful. They traveled together, explored new hobbies, and supported each other in ways that felt natural and fulfilling. Yet, when Ethan received an unexpected invitation in the mail, he was reminded of how far he had come. The envelope was from Denver, addressed in Sarah's handwriting. Inside was an invitation to the nonprofit's annual gala, along with a note. "Ethan, I'd be honored if you could attend. No expectations, just an acknowledgement of how much you've inspired me to do better. Thank you for everything." Ethan debated for days. Kara noticed his hesitation. "You should go," she said one evening. "Not for her but for you. Sometimes, seeing the past in a new light helps us appreciate the present even more." At the gala, Ethan walked in, confident and composed. Sarah greeted him warmly, her demeanor calm and self-assured. They exchanged pleasantries, and as the evening progressed, Ethan saw how much she had grown. She spoke passionately about her work, her eyes lighting up as she described the lives they were changing. As he left the event, Ethan felt no pang of regret, no lingering pain. Instead, he felt gratitude for the journey, the lessons, and the person he had become. He drove back to Arizona that night, ready to embrace the future with Kara, knowing his past no longer held him back. Ethan's relationship with Kara grew deeper and more fulfilling as the months went on. Kara's adventurous nature pushed Ethan to embrace parts of life he had never explored. Whether it was spontaneous hiking trips, late-night debates over existential questions, or lazy mornings spent cooking elaborate breakfasts, every moment with Kara felt vibrant and alive. It was a stark contrast to the gray monotony Ethan had lived before. One sunny weekend, Kara proposed a road trip. "Let's just drive," she said with an infectious grin. "No plan. No schedule. Let's see where the road takes us." Ethan hesitated for a moment before nodding. "Why not? Let's do it." They packed light, tossing a few essentials and snacks into the back of the car, and hit the open road. They laughed as they picked random exits and followed hand-painted signs advertising everything from antique shops to roadside diners. Hours into their journey, they stumbled upon a small vineyard nestled in the rolling hills. The vineyard was hosting a local wine festival, complete with live music, food trucks, and a cheerful crowd. As the day unfolded, Ethan and Kara sampled wines, danced to acoustic guitar melodies, and shared quiet moments under the shade of sprawling oak trees. While sitting on a picnic blanket as the sun set, Kara turned to Ethan, her face glowing in the golden light. "You know," she said softly, "I think this is the happiest I've ever been." Ethan looked at her, his chest tightening in the best possible way. "Me too," he replied, his voice steady with conviction. For years, Ethan had believed happiness was something you fought for, a prize to be earned after enduring hardship. But with Kara, he realized that happiness could be simple, found in the small, unguarded moments shared with the right person. Still, in the quiet recesses of his mind, Ethan occasionally thought of Sarah. Not with longing or resentment, but as a marker of how much he had grown. The man he had become felt so far removed from the man he had been with her. It was a bittersweet realization, but one he cherished for the lessons it carried. Dear audience, have you ever found peace after letting go of something that once felt impossible to release? How did it shape who you are today? Months after the gala, Ethan received another unexpected letter from Sarah. He found it waiting in his mailbox one crisp morning, its familiar handwriting unmistakable. For a moment he simply stared at the envelope, unsure if he even wanted to open it. His life with Kara was thriving, and he had moved past the pain of his old life. Did revisiting it serve any purpose? Kara noticed his hesitation when he brought the mail inside. "You don't have to open it," she said gently. "But if you do, remember, it's just words. You control what they mean." Her calm encouragement gave Ethan the strength to tear open the envelope. Inside was a short, handwritten letter on simple stationery. He read it slowly, absorbing every word. "Ethan, I wanted to thank you again for coming to the gala. Seeing you there reminded me of how much your belief in growth and forgiveness has impacted me. I've been thinking a lot about our journey, both together and apart. I realize now how much I needed to lose you to understand myself. You once told me that moving on wasn't about forgetting but about embracing what comes next. I see that now, and I hope you found the happiness you deserve. Thank you for everything you taught me, directly and indirectly. You were my greatest teacher. Take care always, Sarah." Ethan set the letter down and exhaled deeply, a mix of emotions coursing through him. The words weren't painful, but they were poignant. Sarah's acknowledgement of her growth mirrored his own journey. He felt no urge to respond, but there was a sense of closure he hadn't expected. Kara walked over and placed a hand on his shoulder. "How do you feel?" she asked softly. "Grateful," Ethan replied after a long pause. "It feels like everything has come full circle. She's found her peace and so have I." Kara smiled, her eyes warm with understanding. "That's the best kind of ending." Ethan folded the letter and placed it in a drawer. It wasn't a keepsake to revisit but a marker of how far he had come. His past had shaped him but it no longer defined him. As he looked at Kara, he felt a profound sense of certainty. His future was brighter than ever. Question: do you believe closure is something we seek from others, or something we find within ourselves? Life with Kara had become a series of adventures both big and small. Ethan often found himself reflecting on how different his world felt now compared to the one he'd left behind. Every day with Kara was a blend of laughter, vulnerability, and growth. She challenged him in ways that made him stronger, but she also provided the kind of support he never realized he needed. One crisp autumn evening, Ethan and Kara were hiking their favorite trail in Sedona. The air was cool, and the golden light of the setting sun bathed the red rocks in a warm glow. Kara, ever the trailblazer, had chosen the path, claiming there was a view at the top that would make the climb worth it. When they reached the summit, Ethan was struck by the sheer beauty of the landscape. Below them, the desert stretched endlessly, painted in hues of orange and red. Kara turned to him, her face lit with excitement. "Told you it was worth it," she said, her hands on her hips as she caught her breath. "It's incredible," Ethan agreed, but his eyes lingered on her instead of the view. At that moment he knew what he wanted to do. Reaching into his jacket pocket, Ethan pulled out a small velvet box. Kara's eyes widened as he dropped to one knee. "Kara," he began, his voice steady despite the pounding of his heart, "you've shown me what it means to truly live and love again. You've been my partner, my rock, and my greatest adventure. I can't imagine a future without you in it. Will you marry me?" Tears filled Kara's eyes as she smiled and nodded. "Yes, Ethan. 1,000 times yes." Ethan slipped the ring onto her finger, and they embraced, the world around them fading into the background. The climb down the trail was filled with laughter and plans for their future. For Ethan, the moment marked the start of a new chapter, one filled with hope, love, and the promise of a life built together. Have you ever experienced a moment where you felt completely certain about a decision, knowing it would change your life forever? What was it, and how did it shape your journey? As wedding preparations began, Ethan found himself unexpectedly drawn to Denver. He hadn't been back since the gala months earlier, but something about this stage of his life made him want to revisit the place where his transformation had begun. Kara noticed his pensiveness one evening. "You've been quiet," she said as they sat on the couch, wedding planning materials spread around them. "I've been thinking about Denver," Ethan admitted. "There's a part of me that feels like I need to go back, one last time." Kara tilted her head, studying him. "For closure? Maybe," Ethan said. "Or maybe just to remind myself of how far I've come." With Kara's encouragement, Ethan made the trip. As he walked through the familiar streets of Denver, memories surfaced with every turn. He passed the coffee shop where he and Sarah had reconnected, the park where he'd spent hours reflecting after leaving, and even their old house. It had been sold and renovated, the new owners transforming it into something almost unrecognizable. Ethan felt a strange mix of emotions: nostalgia, gratitude, and relief. He didn't feel the pang of regret he once might have. Instead, he saw Denver as a chapter that had served its purpose in his story. Before leaving, Ethan made one last stop, the nonprofit where Sarah worked. He hadn't planned to see her, but curiosity got the better of him. When he walked through the doors, Sarah looked up from her desk, surprise flickering across her face. "Ethan," she said, standing. "What are you doing here?" "I was in town," he replied. "Thought I'd stop by." They talked briefly, catching up on life. Sarah shared her excitement about a new initiative the nonprofit was launching, and Ethan found himself genuinely happy for her. As he left, Sarah called after him, "Congratulations on everything, Ethan. You deserve it." Walking out of the building, Ethan felt lighter. His visit to Denver had given him exactly what he needed: a reminder of how far he had come and the clarity to fully embrace his future. Ethan and Kara dived into the whirlwind of wedding planning, but unlike the stress-filled processes he'd heard others talk about, theirs was filled with laughter and shared excitement. They decided on an intimate ceremony, one that reflected their journey and their love for simplicity. The venue was a cozy vineyard in Arizona, much like the one they had stumbled upon during their road trip. It felt symbolic of the life they were building, unpretentious, grounded, and rich with meaning. As the days counted down, Ethan often found himself reflecting on how different this felt from the life he had left behind. With Kara, there was no pressure to conform to expectations or live up to an imagined ideal. Their relationship was built on mutual respect, understanding, and a shared sense of adventure. The wedding day arrived on a crisp spring afternoon. Kara walked down the aisle in a flowing dress, her hair crowned with wildflowers. Ethan's heart swelled as he watched her approach, her radiant smile stealing his breath. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. Friends and family surrounded them as they exchanged vows, promising not perfection but a commitment to growth and partnership. When the officiant declared them husband and wife, the cheers erupted, and Ethan felt a wave of joy so profound it brought tears to his eyes. The reception was a lively celebration of love, laughter, and the community they had built together. As they danced under a canopy of stars, Ethan realized this was everything he had ever wanted, and more. Married life came naturally to Ethan and Kara. They settled into a rhythm that balanced work, adventure, and quiet moments of connection. Ethan continued to expand his freelance business, while Kara poured her energy into community projects. Together they began dreaming about the future, a home in the countryside, perhaps even a family. One evening, as they sat on the porch of their small home, Kara turned to Ethan with a thoughtful expression. "Do you ever think about how far you've come?" she asked. Ethan nodded. "All the time. But it's not just me. You've helped me see what's possible." Kara smiled and leaned her head on his shoulder. "And you've taught me that it's okay to take things slow, to find joy in the small moments." Their life wasn't without its challenges, but they faced each obstacle as a team. When Kara's mother fell ill, Ethan was there to support her through the difficult days. When a major client project nearly overwhelmed Ethan, Kara reminded him to step back and breathe. They had built a partnership that was unshakable, rooted in love and respect. As the seasons changed, so did their dreams. They began planning a move to a larger property with enough space to grow their passions. A garden for Kara, a workshop for Ethan, and plenty of room for the future they envisioned. Together, they were creating a life that was uniquely theirs, shaped by their past but defined by the possibilities of what lay ahead. Ethan often thought back to the man he had been when he left Denver. He barely recognized that version of himself, but he was grateful for every step of the journey. Without the pain, the mistakes, and the growth, he wouldn't be here now, sitting beside the woman who had become his everything. Life, Ethan realized, wasn't about erasing the past. It was about learning from it, growing beyond it, and building something beautiful in its wake. The move to their new countryside home marked a fresh chapter for Ethan and Kara. The property was everything they had dreamed of: sprawling fields, a cozy house with a wraparound porch, and enough space to bring their individual passions to life. Kara dove into gardening, transforming the backyard into a lush paradise of vibrant flowers and fresh vegetables. Ethan set up a workshop in the barn, where he tinkered with woodworking projects and explored creative endeavors he'd never had time for before. Their days were filled with purpose and quiet joy. Kara would often bring Ethan lunch in the barn, the two of them sitting on a weathered bench as they talked about their plans for the future. "What do you think about kids?" Kara asked one afternoon, her tone casual but her eyes hopeful. Ethan smiled, setting down his tools. "I think it's something I'd love to explore, when the time is right." Kara nodded, her expression softening. "Me too." Their life wasn't perfect, but it was theirs. When challenges arose, they faced them together, always leaning on the foundation of trust and respect they had built. Ethan often reflected on how far he had come, not just in his relationship with Kara but in his relationship with himself. He had learned to value his worth and embrace the life he truly wanted. One summer afternoon, Ethan received an unexpected email from a former colleague in Denver. It was an invitation to speak at a professional development seminar for IT consultants. Initially, Ethan hesitated. Returning to Denver felt like stepping back into a past he had left behind. But Kara encouraged him. "You should go," she said. "Not to revisit the past but to show yourself how much you've grown." Ethan agreed, and a few weeks later, he found himself walking into a familiar conference center. The seminar was a success, and Ethan's insights on innovation and resilience were met with enthusiastic applause. After his talk, he wandered the city for a while, revisiting old haunts with a new perspective. He ended his day at the park where he had once sat in despair, wondering how to rebuild his life. Now as he stood there he felt nothing but gratitude. The pain and uncertainty that had once consumed him were replaced with a deep sense of peace. He pulled out his phone and snapped a picture of the park, sending it to Kara with the caption, "Full circle." When Ethan returned home he shared his experience with Kara over dinner. "It's strange," he said. "Being back there didn't feel like reopening old wounds. It felt like closure." Kara reached across the table, taking his hand in hers. "That's because you've built something new. Something stronger." Ethan nodded, a smile spreading across his face. "We've built something new." As they sat together, the sun dipping below the horizon, Ethan felt an overwhelming sense of contentment. The journey had been long and filled with challenges, but it had led him to a life more beautiful than he had ever imagined. Ethan and Kara's life continued to flourish as they embraced their new beginnings. The countryside property became a haven, not only for themselves but for the friends and family who visited often. Kara's garden bloomed with color, and Ethan's workshop transformed into a creative retreat where he crafted custom furniture and art pieces that began to draw attention online. One evening, as they sat on the porch sipping tea, Kara brought up an idea that had been on her mind. "What if we hosted a retreat here? A place where people can come to disconnect and find themselves like we did?" Ethan turned the idea over in his mind, watching the fireflies blink in the twilight. "I think that's a beautiful idea. This place has given us so much peace. It'd be amazing to share that with others." Over the next few months, they worked together to bring Kara's vision to life. They converted the barn into a cozy guest house, complete with handmade furniture and rustic charm. Kara designed workshops on mindfulness and sustainable living, while Ethan contributed classes on creative expression through woodworking and photography. By the time they welcomed their first group of visitors, the retreat was a testament to their shared purpose and love. Watching their guests laugh and bond around the fire pit, Ethan realized that this was another full-circle moment. He had once searched for peace within himself, and now he was helping others find it too. Years passed and Ethan and Kara's retreat became a beloved sanctuary for many. Their life was filled with meaning, anchored by the love they had built together. They celebrated milestones, wedding anniversaries, new friendships, and the eventual addition of a little one who brought even more joy to their lives. One afternoon, as Ethan worked in his workshop with their toddler playing nearby, he glanced out the window at Kara tending to her garden. The scene filled him with gratitude. His journey had been one of heartbreak and healing, but it had led him here, to a life he couldn't have dreamed of in his darkest moments. Later that evening, as the family gathered around the dinner table, Kara raised her glass. "To us," she said. "To every twist and turn that brought us here." Ethan clinked his glass with hers, his heart full. "To the journey," he replied. The sun set over the horizon, painting the sky in hues of gold and pink. For Ethan, the past was a chapter he no longer dwelled on. His story was now rooted in the present, with a future bright and limitless. Thank you for joining Ethan's journey of transformation, resilience, and love. If this story inspired you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to explore more stories that celebrate growth and hope. We'd love to hear your thoughts. What moment in your life marked a turning point for you? Let us know in the comments below.